Verified fears, family. What Anne discovered in her sealed trailer will make you never accept mystery freight again. She was hauling a standard reefer load when the temperature controls started malfunctioning. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when the cargo started breathing. Rhythmic, heavy breathing coming from inside a sealed trailer that should contain nothing but frozen goods. Anne found claw marks scratched from the inside and air holes that shouldn't exist. What was growing in that trailer transformed from simple cargo into something that wanted to add Anne to its collection. Her discovery will make you question what's really being shipped across America's highways. Picture this. You're driving through the Nevada desert at 3 a.m. when your radio crackles to life with your dead dispatcher's voice, warning you about a jackknifed semi that isn't there yet. But here's what will chill you to the bone. Following his warnings saves your life 3 times in one night. My name is Davina, and I've been hauling freight across this country for 15 years. I've seen every mile of asphalt between Los Angeles and Miami, driven through every kind of weather hell can throw at you. And I thought I'd experienced every weird thing the road could dish out. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It started 6 months after Jerry Hutchins died in that pileup on I-40. Jerry had been my dispatcher at Crossroads Freight for 8 years, and he was the best in the business. Guy could route you around traffic jams that hadn't even happened yet, find you loads when freight was scarce, and somehow always knew exactly where you were without checking the GPS. When that drunk driver took him out near Flagstaff, it felt like losing family. The company hired some kid named Brandon to replace him, fresh out of college with a logistics degree and absolutely no idea how the real world worked. Brandon couldn't find his way out of a paper bag, let alone route a 53-foot trailer through downtown Chicago. After dealing with his incompetence for months, I was seriously considering switching companies. That's when Jerry started calling again. The first time it happened, I was running a load of auto parts from Detroit to Phoenix, somewhere around midnight on a lonely stretch of I-70 in Kansas. My Peterbilt 379 was humming along at 65 mph when the CB crackled to life with that familiar gravelly voice I'd heard 1,000 times before. Davina, you copy? This is dispatch. I grabbed the mic without thinking. Yeah, Jerry, I'm here. What's up? Listen to me real careful, darling. You need to take exit 142 and get off I-70 right now. Don't ask questions, just do it. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. Jerry had always called me darling. It was just his way. But there was an urgency in his voice I'd never heard before. Jerry, what are you talking about? My route has me staying on I-70 for another 200 miles. Davina, trust me on this one. Take 142 and follow the truck route signs. Get back on I-70 at exit 161. Do it now. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible. Jerry was dead. I'd been to his funeral, watched them lower his casket into the ground, and comforted his widow at the reception afterward. But his voice on that CB was as clear as if he was sitting right next to me. I took exit 142. 20 minutes later, while I was following some backcountry route through farmland, my phone rang. It was Brandon from dispatch, and he was panicked. Davina, where the hell are you? I'm showing you off route. Jerry told me to take this detour. What's going on? Jerry, what are you talking about? There's been a massive pileup on I-70 at mile marker 147, semi-jackknifed in both lanes. Took out 6 cars. Highway's going to be closed for hours. How did you know to get off? I couldn't answer him. Mile marker 147 was exactly where I would have been if I'd stayed on course. The second incident happened 3 weeks later on I-80 through Wyoming. I was fighting a brutal headwind, making terrible time on a load that was already cutting it close for delivery. Around 2 a.m., with nothing but darkness and tumbleweeds for company, Jerry's voice crackled through the CB again. "Davina, you need to pull into that rest area coming up on your right. Park it and take your mandatory break now." "Jerry, I can't afford to stop. I'm already running behind schedule, and if I take my 10-hour break now, I'll miss my delivery window." "Pull over now. Darling, trust me on this one." The desperation in his voice made my hands shake as I downshifted and took the exit. The rest area was nearly empty, just one other truck parked way over by the picnic tables. I set my electronic logs for a 10-hour break and tried to sleep, but Jerry's voice kept echoing in my head. At 6 a.m., my phone woke me up. Brandon again, and he sounded like he'd been crying. "Davina, thank God you're okay. Where are you?" "Rest area on I-80, mile marker 234. "Why?" "There was a freak blizzard last night. Came out of nowhere around 3 a.m. and lasted until dawn. Zero visibility, trucks jackknifing all over the place. The highway's littered with wrecked semis. If you'd been driving through that..." I never finished that conversation. I just hung up and stared at my CB radio, wondering what the hell was happening to me. The third warning came on a scorching July night in the Mojave Desert. I was hauling a load of electronics from San Francisco to Houston, taking I-40 through the wasteland between Barstow and Flagstaff. The temperature was still over 100 degrees at midnight, and my air conditioning was struggling to keep up. "Davina, this is dispatch. You need to get off at the next exit and find a truck stop. Park it for the night." This time, I was ready for him. "Jerry, you're dead. I went to your funeral. What the hell is going on?" "Darling, I wish I could explain it all to you, but there ain't time. Your engine's about to blow a head gasket. If you keep driving, you'll be stranded in the desert with no cell service and temperatures that'll kill you before sunrise." "My engine's running fine, Jerry. All the gauges are normal, oil pressure's good, coolant temperature's right where it should be. Davina, please, just trust me one more time." Against every instinct I had, I took the next exit and pulled into a Flying J truck stop. I parked under the lights and popped the hood to check my engine. Everything looked perfect. No leaks, no unusual sounds. All fluids at proper levels. I was starting to think I was losing my mind when a mechanic walked over. "Having trouble?" "I don't know. My dispatcher said my engine was about to blow, but everything looks fine to me." The mechanic shined his flashlight around the engine compartment and frowned. "When's the last time you had your coolant system serviced?" "About 6 months ago, right after I bought this truck." He pointed to a small crack in one of the coolant hoses that I hadn't noticed. "See that? That hose is about to fail completely. If it lets go while you're driving, you'll lose all your coolant in minutes. In this heat, your engine would seize up before you could get pulled over." I had the hose replaced and spent the rest of the night wondering how Jerry could possibly know about a hairline crack in a coolant hose from beyond the grave. After that third incident, the warning stopped coming. No more late-night CB calls, no more impossible knowledge of mechanical failures or road hazards. For weeks, I kept waiting for Jerry's voice to crackle through the static. But there was only silence. It wasn't until I was cleaning out my truck at a maintenance facility that I found the explanation. Tucked behind my CB radio was a small piece of paper I'd never seen before, written in Jerry's distinctive handwriting. "Darling, I'm sorry I had to scare you, but I couldn't let you end up like me. Those 3 times I warned you were the 3 times you were supposed to die. I've been trying to balance the books, make up for all the drivers I couldn't save when I was alive. But helping you used up everything I had left. I can't talk to you anymore, but I wanted you to know. Every mile you drive from now on is a gift. Don't waste it. Take care of yourself out there. I destroyed my CB radio that day, but it didn't matter. Late at night, when I'm driving through the loneliest stretches of highway, I can still hear Jerry's voice in the static of my AM radio, in the hiss of air brakes, in the whistle of wind through my cab. He's not warning me anymore. He's just there, riding shotgun like he always did, making sure I make it home safe. But sometimes, when I pass other trucks broken down on the side of the road, I wonder if Jerry's still out there, still trying to balance the books, still saving drivers who don't even know they're about to die. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear his voice on Channel 19, warning some other driver about dangers they can't see coming. The road takes everything from you eventually. Your time, your family, your health, your sanity. But sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gives you a guardian angel who used to be a dispatcher, watching over you from beyond the grave, making sure you live to drive another day. Imagine being trapped in an endless loop where mile marker 187 appears every 20 minutes despite driving straight for hours. Your fuel gauge drops, your logbook shows impossible mileage. But that same mile marker keeps appearing like a broken record. My name's Flora, and I'm what you'd call a greenhorn. Barely 3 weeks into my first solo run, when everything I thought I knew about highways, physics, and reality got turned upside down and shaken until the screws came loose. I'd graduated from CDL school with perfect scores, aced my road test, and thought I was hot stuff behind the wheel of my shiny new Freightliner Cascadia. The veterans at the truck stop had laughed when I told them I wasn't scared of anything the road could throw at me. Turns out, I should have been. The load was simple enough. Electronics from Denver to Salt Lake City, standard freight that should have been a milk run for any competent driver. I'd planned my route carefully, calculated my drive time down to the minute, and had everything mapped out on my GPS, my atlas, and my electronic logging device. I was going to prove that the new generation of drivers could handle anything the old-timers could dish out. I should have listened to their warnings about I-80 through Wyoming. Everything started normally enough. I pulled out of the Denver shipping facility at exactly 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, hit I-76 north to connect with I-80 west, and was making excellent time through the Colorado foothills. The weather was perfect, clear skies, light traffic, and my Cascadia was running like a dream. By the time I crossed into Wyoming, I was actually ahead of schedule and feeling pretty good about myself. That's when I first saw mile marker 187. Nothing unusual about it at first glance, just another green sign with white lettering marking the distance along the interstate. I noted it on my trip log and kept rolling west at a steady 65 km/h. The landscape around me was typical Wyoming high desert. Endless stretches of sagebrush, distant mountains, and not much else. Boring as hell, but that's what podcasts and coffee are for. 23 minutes later, I saw mile marker 187 again. At first, I figured I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd misread the first one, or maybe there was a duplicate numbering system I didn't know about. But when I checked my electronic logs, they showed I'd been driving continuously westbound at highway speed for the past 23 minutes. I should have been at mile marker 202 by now, not seeing the same marker twice. I grabbed my CB mic and called out on Channel 19. Breaker 19, this is Rookie Flora looking for a smoky report on I-80 westbound. Anyone got their ears on? Static. Complete dead silence. Not even the usual background chatter you get from other truckers sharing road conditions and warnings about speed traps. I tried switching channels, but every frequency was empty. It was like every other truck on the highway had vanished. That's when I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. There were no other vehicles visible in either direction. No cars, no trucks, no motorcycles. Nothing. Just me and about 1,000,000 acres of empty highway stretching to the horizon. In the 3 weeks I'd been driving, I'd never seen a major interstate this empty, not even at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. 18 minutes later, mile marker 187 appeared again. This time, I pulled over immediately and called dispatch. My hands were shaking as I dialed Brandon's direct number, praying he'd answer and explain what was happening to me. Crossroads Freight, this is Brandon. Brandon, this is Flora. I'm having some kind of problem with my route. My GPS is malfunctioning and I think I'm lost. Lost? Flora, I'm showing you right on course on I-80 westbound. Your GPS tracker has you making normal progress toward Salt Lake City. What's your current mile marker? I looked up at the green sign I'd now seen 3 times. Mile marker 187. That's right where you should be based on your departure time and current speed. What's the problem? How could I explain that I'd seen the same mile marker 3 times in the past hour without sounding completely insane? Brandon, I think there's something wrong with the highway markers out here. They're not making sense. Flora, you've been driving for less than 4 hours, and you're already at mile marker 187. You're making excellent time. Just keep doing what you're doing, and you'll be in Salt Lake City by tomorrow morning. After I hung up, I sat in my cab for 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what was happening. According to my electronic logs, my GPS, and dispatch, everything was normal. According to my own eyes, I was trapped in some kind of impossible loop where the same stretch of highway repeated itself endlessly. I decided to conduct an experiment. I set my trip odometer to 0, noted the exact time, and started driving again. This time, I paid attention to every detail. The pattern of cracks in the asphalt. A distinctive cluster of 3 dead trees about a mile past the marker, and an old fence post with rusted barbed wire. 19 minutes and 47 seconds later, I passed the same 3 dead trees. Same fence post, same cracks in the asphalt. And there, rising up ahead of me like some kind of cosmic joke, was mile marker 187. My trip odometer read 21.6 miles. I'd driven 21.6 miles in a straight line and ended up exactly where I'd started. That's not just impossible. That's geometry having a mental breakdown and taking reality along for the ride. The 4th time I passed the marker, I decided to stop and examine it up close. I pulled onto the shoulder and walked back to the green sign, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. The marker looked completely normal. Standard Department of Transportation specifications, properly mounted on a steel post, showing exactly what it should show. But when I touched the metal surface, it was ice cold despite the warm afternoon sun. That's when I heard the voices. They were faint at first, like distant radio static, but gradually became clearer. Multiple voices, all talking at once, all sounding confused and desperate. I pressed my ear against the mile marker and could make out individual words. Been driving for 6 hours now, same marker every time. My fuel gauge says empty, but I never stop for gas. Anyone know how to get off this highway? My CB's been dead for days. Please, somebody help me. I've been passing mile marker 187 for 3 weeks. I jerked my head back from the sign like I'd been electrocuted. Those were the voices of other truckers, other drivers who'd gotten trapped on this same impossible stretch of highway. Some of them sounded like they'd been here much longer than I had. I ran back to my truck and grabbed my CB mic, frantically cycling through every channel. Mayday, Mayday. This is Flora on I-80 mile marker 187. If anyone can hear this, please respond. I think I'm trapped in some kind of loop. This time, I got an answer. A tired-sounding male voice came through the static. "Flora? New fish? Welcome to hell, sweetheart. Name's Chuck, been passing that same marker for about 8 months now." 8 months? That's impossible. Lady, you just drove the same 20-mile stretch of highway 4 times and ended up where you started. Nothing's impossible anymore. Other voices started joining the conversation. Drivers who'd been trapped for days, weeks, months. Some claimed to have been circling mile marker 187 for years. All of them had the same story. They'd been driving normally when they got caught in the loop, and now they couldn't escape. "How are you still alive?" I asked. "What about food, fuel, sleep?" Chuck's laugh was bitter. "That's the beauty of this place. Your fuel gauge drops, but you never actually run out of gas. You get hungry, but you never starve. You get tired, but you never really need to sleep. It's like being frozen in time. Except you're still conscious enough to know you're trapped." I spent the next several hours, if time even meant anything in this place, talking to the other trapped drivers. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all circling the same 20-mile stretch of I-80, all passing mile marker 187 every 20 minutes, like clockwork. Some had theories about what was happening. Chuck thought it was some kind of government experiment. A woman named Sarah believed it was a magnetic anomaly that bent space-time. An old-timer called Diesel Dan was convinced it was punishment for something terrible he'd done decades ago. I had my own theory, and it was much simpler and much more terrifying. I thought we were dead. The more I listened to their stories, the more convinced I became. Every single driver had been involved in some kind of accident or near miss just before they got trapped. Chuck had swerved to avoid a deer and thought he'd hit a tree. Sarah remembered her brakes failing on a steep grade. Dan talked about falling asleep at the wheel during a blizzard. I tried to remember my own last clear memory before seeing mile marker 187 for the first time. I'd been driving through the Colorado foothills when a semi had drifted into my lane. I'd yanked the wheel hard to the right to avoid a head-on collision. And then I was on I-80 in Wyoming, passing mile marker 187. The horrible truth hit me like a freight train. I hadn't avoided that collision. I died in a twisted wreck of metal and glass, and this endless highway was my purgatory. We were all ghosts, trapped in the last moments before our deaths, doomed to drive the same stretch of road forever. But accepting that truth was also the key to escape. The next time I approached mile marker 187, I didn't try to drive past it. Instead, I pulled over, turned off my engine, and waited. The other voices on the CB were begging me not to stop, warning me that something terrible would happen if I broke the pattern. They were right. As soon as my engine went silent, the desert around me began to change. The sagebrush withered and died, the mountains crumbled into dust, and the highway itself started cracking and falling apart. But instead of being terrified, I felt a strange sense of peace. A bright light appeared in the distance, growing larger and brighter as it approached. When it reached me, I saw that it wasn't a light at all. It was an opening, a doorway leading somewhere else. I stepped out of my truck for the last time and walked toward the light. Behind me, I could hear the other drivers screaming through their CB radios, begging me to come back, to keep driving, to stay trapped with them forever. But I kept walking. And when I stepped through that doorway, I finally understood that mile marker 187 wasn't a place, it was a choice. The choice to accept death, or to spend eternity running from it. I made my choice, and mile marker 187 disappeared forever. She was hauling a standard reefer load when the temperature controls started malfunctioning. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when the cargo started breathing. I'm Ann, been an owner-operator for 12 years, and I've hauled everything from fresh produce to pharmaceuticals across this continent. When you've been in this business as long as I have, you learn not to ask too many questions about certain loads. The money's good, the paperwork's clean, and what's in the trailer stays in the trailer. That's the rule that's kept me profitable and out of trouble for over a decade. But some rules are meant to be broken, and breaking this one almost cost me my sanity. The call came in on a Thursday evening while I was deadheading through Memphis, looking for my next load. Dispatch had something special. Rush freight, premium rate, sealed trailer with strict no inspection orders. The shipper was a pharmaceutical company I'd never heard of called Helix Biosystems, and they needed their cargo delivered to a research facility in Portland within 48 hours. The pay was 3 times my usual rate, enough to cover my truck payment for 2 months. I should have known better. In this business, when someone's willing to pay that kind of money with no questions asked, there's always a reason. The pickup was at an industrial facility on the outskirts of Memphis, one of those generic concrete buildings surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras. The loading dock was empty, except for a single reefer trailer already sealed and ready to go. No loading crew, no paperwork to sign beyond the standard bill of lading. Just a nervous-looking supervisor who handed me the keys and told me to maintain the trailer temperature at exactly 38 degrees Fahrenheit. "What's in there?" I asked, more out of habit than curiosity. "Biological samples," he said without meeting my eyes. "Temperature-sensitive research materials. The seal cannot be broken under any circumstances, and the temperature cannot fluctuate more than 2 degrees in either direction." I hooked up to the trailer, connected the electrical lines, and fired up the refrigeration unit. The carrier reefer system was top of the line, newer than anything I'd ever pulled, with digital temperature controls and satellite monitoring. As I pulled away from the facility, I could see the supervisor on his phone, probably reporting to whoever had arranged this shipment that their precious cargo was on its way. The first 100 miles went smoothly. I-40 west through Arkansas was mostly empty, and my reefer unit was maintaining a steady 38 degrees, according to the digital readout. I was making excellent time and already calculating how I'd spend the bonus money when the first temperature alarm sounded. According to the display, the trailer temperature had spiked to 42 degrees for about 30 seconds before the system corrected itself. No big deal. Reefer units fluctuate all the time, especially when you're climbing grades or sitting in traffic. I made a note in my logbook and kept driving. The second alarm came an hour later, this time showing a drop to 34 degrees. Then another spike to 45. Then a drop to 29. The temperature swings were getting more extreme and more frequent, despite the fact that the refrigeration unit was running continuously and all the electrical connections looked solid. By the time I reached Little Rock, the alarms were going off every few minutes. I pulled into a truck stop and spent an hour checking every connection, every fuse, every component I could access. Everything looked perfect. But the temperature inside the trailer was fluctuating wildly between 25 and 50 degrees. That's when I first heard the sound. It was barely audible over the noise of the reefer unit. A low, rhythmic sound that seemed to be coming from inside the trailer. At first, I thought it was mechanical, maybe a loose component vibrating against the trailer walls. But as I listened more carefully, pressing my ear against the insulated aluminum skin, I realized what I was hearing. Breathing. Deep, slow, regular breathing, like something very large was sleeping inside my trailer. I tried calling dispatch, but they couldn't reach anyone at Helix Biosystems after normal business hours. The emergency contact number just went to voicemail. I was on my own with a trailer full of something that was apparently alive and getting warmer by the hour. The breathing sounds got louder as the night progressed. By the time I reached Oklahoma City, I could hear them clearly, even from inside my cab with the windows up. It wasn't just one source of breathing anymore. There were multiple rhythms, different patterns, like several large organisms all respiring in their own cycles. The temperature swings were getting more violent, too. 1 minute the trailer would be at 20 degrees, the next it would spike to 60. The reefer unit was working overtime, cycling on and off constantly, struggling to maintain any kind of stable environment. Whatever was in there was generating its own heat, fighting against the refrigeration system. Around 3 a.m., somewhere in the Texas Panhandle, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were marks on the inside walls of the trailer, long scratches that definitely hadn't been there when I picked up the load. I could see them clearly in the beam of my flashlight. 4 parallel gouges in the aluminum that looked exactly like claw marks. But that was impossible. The trailer had been sealed at pickup, and I hadn't opened it. Nothing could be making marks on the inside walls unless it was already in there when I hooked up. And if that was the case, what the hell was Helix Biosystems shipping? I tried calling their emergency number again, and this time someone answered. A woman with a tired voice and a slight accent I couldn't place. Helix Biosystems emergency line. This is Ann driving your shipment to Portland. I'm having temperature control issues, and I need to know what's in this trailer. Long pause. Driver, you are not authorized for that information. Maintain temperature at 38 degrees and complete delivery as scheduled. Lady, my reefer unit is going crazy. The temperature's swinging 50 degrees in both directions, and there's something in this trailer that's breathing and clawing at the walls. I need to know what I'm hauling. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Driver, whatever you do not open that trailer. Do not break the seal. Complete your delivery and walk away. Some cargo is not meant to be seen. She hung up before I could ask any more questions. The next morning brought a new horror. When I did my pre-trip inspection in Amarillo, I found something that shouldn't have been possible. There were small holes drilled through the trailer walls from the inside out. Perfectly round holes about the size of a pencil, scattered across the rear and side panels. Fresh metal shavings were scattered on the ground beneath each hole. Whatever was in my trailer was drilling air holes. The breathing was clearly audible now, even over road noise and engine sounds. Multiple organisms, definitely alive, definitely large. And they were getting more active as the day progressed. I could hear movement inside the trailer, scraping sounds, and what almost sounded like communication. Low-frequency calls and responses that made my teeth ache. By the time I reached Denver, I was seriously considering abandoning the load. The temperature alarms were constant now, the breathing sounds had become a chorus, and the holes in the trailer walls were multiplying. Whatever Helix Biosystems was shipping, it was trying to get out. That night, parked at a truck stop outside Denver, I made a decision that would haunt me forever. I had to know what was in that trailer. I had to see what I'd been carrying across half the country. Using a pocket knife, I carefully cut through the security seal on the trailer doors. The lock mechanism was warm to the touch, almost hot, and seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched the breathing sounds. When the doors swung open, a wave of humid organic heat washed over me, carrying a smell like rotting flowers mixed with copper pennies. The trailer was empty. Completely, impossibly empty. No cargo, no biological samples, no crates or containers of any kind. Just bare aluminum walls covered in those claw marks and breathing holes, and a floor that seemed to pulse and writhe in the beam of my flashlight. That's when I realized the horrible truth. The trailer itself had become alive. The walls were breathing, the floor was a membrane, and the entire 43-foot chamber had transformed into the interior of some vast organism. The claw marks weren't made by something trapped inside. They were growing from the metal itself, like fingernails erupting through skin. I slammed the doors shut and ran back to my cab. But it was too late. The connection had been made. Whatever had been growing in that trailer during the journey had been feeding on something, changing something, and now it was spreading to my truck. I could feel it in the steering wheel first, a warm, organic pulse that matched the rhythm I'd been hearing all day. The dashboard began to develop veins of darker material, like blood vessels spreading beneath plastic skin. My seat started to conform to my body in ways that felt uncomfortably intimate, like it was learning my shape from the inside out. The worst part was that it felt good. The truck was becoming part of me, and I was becoming part of it. My reaction time improved, my fuel efficiency increased, and I could sense road conditions miles ahead through some kind of organic radar system. The biological cargo hadn't been shipped to Portland. It had been shipped to me. I completed the delivery because I had no choice. The research facility in Portland was expecting me, and the thing that had been my truck needed to get home. When I backed up to their loading dock, the trailer doors opened by themselves, and something that looked like a combination of roots and tentacles emerged to make the connection with the building's infrastructure. I never got paid for that load. Helix Biosystems doesn't exist in any corporate database, and there's no record of the shipment in my logbooks. But my truck runs better than ever now, and I never get tired during long hauls. The breathing sounds have become a lullaby that helps me sleep. And the organic modifications make night driving easier than it's ever been. Sometimes, other drivers ask me about the strange marks on my trailer or the way my truck seems to move like a living thing. I just tell them it's a custom paint job and performance modifications. They wouldn't understand the truth, that some cargo changes the driver just as much as the driver changes the cargo. And late at night, when I'm hauling loads across dark highways, I can feel my truck hunting for the next carrier, the next driver ready to become part of something larger than themselves. The biological network is growing, spreading from truck to truck, driver to driver, creating something new on America's highways. We're not just moving freight anymore. We're becoming the freight. How well do you really know what crawls into your cab during mandatory rest breaks? While Azariah slept, something else was driving. Name's Azariah. Been team driving with my partner Marcus for about 2 years now, running coast-to-coast loads in a 2019 Freightliner Cascadia with a 72-inch sleeper. Good money, steady work, and Marcus is solid. Keeps his mouth shut, drives his hours, doesn't mess with my stuff. Perfect partnership, or so I thought until I started waking up in places I didn't remember going to sleep in. Marcus drives nights, mostly. I take the day shift, he takes the overnight stretch, and we swap off every 10 hours like clockwork. System works perfect because I hate driving in the dark anyway. Too many drunk drivers, deer jumping out of nowhere, and weird shit that happens when normal people are sleeping. Give me daylight and clear visibility any day of the week. But the thing about team driving is trust. When you're sleeping in that cramped little bunk behind the driver's seat, you're completely vulnerable. You gotta trust your partner not to drive like an idiot, not to get you killed in some preventable accident, and not to mess with your personal space while you're unconscious. Marcus always respected those boundaries. Never touched my stuff, never adjusted my seat settings, never even looked through my personal belongings. Model co-driver. So when I started waking up with my things moved around, I figured maybe the road vibrations were shifting stuff during the night. Trucking will rearrange everything that isn't nailed down. Bottles rolling around, clothes sliding across surfaces, small items migrating from one side of the cab to the other. No big deal. But then I noticed my seat was adjusted wrong. Every morning when I took over driving, my seat would be moved forward about 3 inches from where I'd left it. The mirrors were tilted differently too, and the radio was always tuned to stations I never listened to. When I asked Marcus about it, he just shrugged and said maybe the electronic controls were glitching. Made sense, I guess. These new trucks are loaded with computerized everything, and electronics can be finicky. Still bothered me, though. I'm particular about my workspace. Everything has its place, everything set up exactly how I like it. Feels weird when someone else messes with your environment, even accidentally. The smell started about a week later. Sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. It was strongest in the sleeper berth, especially around my pillow and blankets. I asked Marcus if he'd been using some kind of air freshener or cologne, but he said he hadn't changed anything about his routine. Figured maybe it was coming from a load we'd hauled? Some freight can leave odors that stick around for days. But the smell got stronger instead of fading away. And it wasn't just flowers anymore. There was something underneath it. Something organic and unpleasant, like meat starting to go bad. I tried washing all my bedding at a truck stop, bought new air fresheners, even had the cab detailed at a blue beacon. Nothing helped. The smell just kept getting worse. That's when I started finding the hair. Long strands of dark brown hair, way longer than anything Marcus or I had. Found them tangled in my blankets, stuck to my pillow, even wrapped around the gear shifter. The first few times I just threw them away. Figured they must have come from somewhere else, maybe a previous driver or picked up from a loading dock somewhere. But they kept appearing, always in my personal space, always around areas where I slept or sat. Marcus swore he'd never seen the hair before. Said he kept his head shaved short for exactly this reason. Long hair was a hassle on the road. He was right about that. His hair was maybe half an inch long, military-style buzz cut he maintained with electric clippers. These strands were at least 2 feet long, thick and coarse, definitely not his. I started taking pictures with my phone, documenting every instance. Hair on my pillow when I woke up. Hair twisted around my steering wheel. Hair clogging the air vents on my side of the cab. Always the same color, always the same length. Always appearing overnight when Marcus was supposed to be driving. The handprints showed up next. Pressed against the inside of the windshield on the passenger side. Like someone had been leaning against the glass from inside the cab. The prints were too big to be Marcus's. Long fingers, narrow palms, proportions that didn't look quite right. And they were always there in the morning, fogged onto the glass like someone had been breathing on it during the night. When I confronted Marcus about it, he got defensive. Said he'd never touched the windshield, never even sat in the passenger seat except during pre-trip inspections. Accused me of trying to make him look bad. Maybe setting him up for some kind of insurance scam. We had our first real argument right there in a Flying J parking lot. Voices raised. Other drivers staring at us like we were crazy. That night, I decided to test him. Before going to sleep, I set up my phone to record video of the cab interior. Hidden it in my toiletry bag, with just the camera lens visible. Programmed it to record for 8 hours straight. If Marcus was messing with my stuff, I'd have proof. If he wasn't, then maybe I could figure out what was really happening. What I saw in that video still gives me nightmares. For the first 3 hours, everything looked normal. Marcus driving, me sleeping in the berth, truck moving steady down the interstate. Around 2 a.m., the video showed Marcus pulling into a rest area for his mandatory break. He set his logs, climbed into the upper bunk, and went to sleep just like always. But at 2:47 a.m., someone else got into the driver's seat. The figure looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, wearing clothes identical to what I'd been sleeping in. But there was something wrong with the way it moved. Like it was learning how to use my body and hadn't quite figured out all the details. It adjusted my seat forward, tilted my mirrors, changed my radio settings, all while I was supposedly sleeping in the bunk behind it. Then it started driving. For the next 4 hours, this thing wearing my appearance drove our truck through the night while both Marcus and I slept. It knew all my habits, how I shifted gears, how I checked mirrors, even how I adjusted the air conditioning. Perfect imitation, except for the occasional movement that seemed just slightly off, like a marionette being operated by someone who'd watched me drive, but never actually done it themselves. The worst part was watching it interact with my personal belongings. It went through my clothes, handled my phone, even ate some of my snacks. But it did everything with this deliberate, studied quality. Like it was memorizing how to be me. And every few minutes, it would turn and look directly at the camera hidden in my toiletry bag, smiling with my face in a way that made my skin crawl. At 6:30 a.m., just before my usual wake-up time, the thing climbed back into the upper bunk where Marcus was sleeping. The video showed Marcus stirring, getting up, and climbing down to wake me for my shift. But when he shook my shoulder, I could see myself already awake in the bunk, eyes open, staring up at him with that same wrong smile. I must have been replaced sometime during the night, but the video didn't show when or how it happened. 1 minute I was sleeping normally. The next minute something else was wearing my body, and Marcus couldn't tell the difference. I watched that video 12 times before I finally accepted what I was seeing. Something had been living in our truck, studying us, learning to imitate us perfectly. And now it had taken my place so completely that even my own driving partner couldn't tell we'd been switched. The thing is, I don't know when I got my body back. The video ended before I could see what happened next, and my memory of that morning is fuzzy. Did the thing give me back control? Did I somehow wrestle my own identity back from whatever had stolen it? Or am I still the copy, walking around thinking I'm the original while the real Azariah is trapped somewhere else? Marcus quit the next week. Said I'd been acting strange, making him uncomfortable, doing things that didn't seem like me. He was right, of course, but not for the reasons he thought. I'd started checking mirrors obsessively, not to watch traffic, but to make sure my reflection was behaving the same way I was. Sometimes it seemed like there was a slight delay, like my image was copying my movements instead of matching them. I drive solo now. Can't trust anyone else in the cab with me. Can't risk them noticing the small things that are still wrong about how I move and speak. But sometimes, late at night when I'm taking my mandatory rest break, I hear someone else in the driver's seat, adjusting my mirrors, changing my radio stations, learning new ways to be me. And in the morning, I never remember getting back behind the wheel. I just wake up somewhere else, in some other truck stop, with no memory of the drive between then and now. My logbook shows the miles. The electronic records confirm I was driving, but I have no recollection of any of it. Maybe I'm still me, and something else is driving during my blackouts. Or maybe I'm the something else now, and the real Azariah is buried so deep in my subconscious that he only surfaces during sleep. Either way, I keep driving. Keep hauling loads across the country, keep trying to figure out which one of me is real. The scariest part is that it doesn't matter anymore. Real or copy, original or replacement. I still have to make my delivery appointments on time. What happens when you accidentally tune into a CB channel that doesn't officially exist? Indy's CB picked up Channel 0 during a thunderstorm, where truckers described routes and truck stops that no longer existed. I'm Indy, 25 years behind the wheel, and I thought I knew every frequency on the CB spectrum like the back of my weathered hands. Channel 19 for general chatter, Channel 17 for the northbound lanes, Channel 9 for emergencies. Hell, I even knew which channels the locals used in different regions. Channel 13 through the Carolinas, Channel 21 out in California. Been talking on these radios since before half the drivers on the road today were even born. But Channel 0, that shouldn't exist. CB radios only go from Channel 1 to Channel 40. Been that way since the FCC standardized the bands back in the 70s. There's no such thing as Channel 0 on a legal CB setup. Shouldn't be possible to tune there, shouldn't pick up anything if you somehow managed it. And sure as hell shouldn't connect you to conversations with drivers who've been dead for 30 years. Yet here I am, telling you about the night that changed everything I thought I knew about the invisible highways that crisscross our airwaves. The storm hit somewhere around midnight between Little Rock and Memphis. One of those Arkansas thunderstorms that comes out of nowhere and turns the sky into a war zone. Lightning was cracking every few seconds, thunder rolling across the flatlands like artillery fire, and rain coming down so hard my wipers couldn't keep up even on their highest setting. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. And I was crawling along I-40 at about 35 miles per hour with my four-ways flashing. That's when the electromagnetic interference started playing hell with my electronics. GPS went haywire, showing me in 3 different states simultaneously. Cell phone lost all signal. And my Cobra CB radio, a reliable old 29 LTD classic I'd been running for 15 years, started picking up strange frequencies between the regular channels. At first, it was just static and distant voices. The kind of atmospheric skip you get during storms when radio signals bounce off the ionosphere and travel hundreds of miles further than they should. Nothing unusual about that. But as the storm intensified, I started hearing something that made me pull over at the next truck stop to investigate. My CB was receiving transmissions on Channel 0. The frequency display clearly showed ERO0, which shouldn't be possible on any CB manufactured in the last 50 years. But there it was, digital readout showing 0. And coming through crystal clear despite the storm were voices I recognized but couldn't place. Veteran drivers talking about routes and truck stops, sharing information about road conditions and speed traps, just regular CB chatter except for one disturbing detail. They were describing places that no longer existed. Westbound. You got that construction zone just past the TA in Joplin, about a 2-mile backup. Came one voice, crackling with that distinctive sound of older CB equipment. Problem was, the TA truck stop in Joplin had been demolished in 2011 after a tornado leveled half the town. I'd stopped there dozens of times in the 80s and 90s, knew the layout like my own living room. But it had been replaced by a newer facility 3 miles down the highway. Yet this driver was talking about it like he'd just passed it, giving current traffic conditions for a location that existed only in memory. Appreciate that. Eastbound. Came another voice in response. How's that scale house at the Missouri line? They've been running hot this week? The scale house he was referring to had been shut down and torn out in 2003 when Missouri moved their way station to a new location. But these drivers were discussing it like it was still operational, comparing notes about which DOT officers were working and how strict they were being about logbook inspections. I grabbed my mic and broke into their conversation. "Breaker Channel 0, this is Indy eastbound on I-40. You boys talking about the old TA in Joplin?" Silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then, "Well, hello there. Indy. Been wondering when you'd find your way to our frequency. Welcome to the night shift." The voice that responded belonged to a driver I'd known years ago. Big Jim Hawkins ran a sharp-looking Peterbilt with custom flames on the hood, always had the best road information, and never steered you wrong. Problem was, Big Jim had died in a pileup outside Amarillo back in 1993. I'd been to his funeral, watched them lower his casket into Texas clay, and mourned the loss of one of the good ones. "Jim Hawkins? That you, old buddy?" "Sure is, Indy. Been waiting for you to join our little convoy. We got drivers here been looking out for you for years, trying to keep you safe on these dangerous roads." That's when other voices started chiming in, and I recognized every single one. Diesel Dan Morrison, killed in a jackknife accident in Colorado, 1987. Sweet Caroline Peters, lost to carbon monoxide poisoning in her sleeper cab, 1991. Tommy Six-String Rodriguez, heart attack at a truck stop in Nevada, 1995. One by one, they introduced themselves, and every name belonged to a driver I'd known, worked with, shared meals and stories with, all of them dead for years or decades. "How is this possible?" I asked, my voice shaking as I held the mic. Big Jim's laugh came through the static, warm and familiar. "Death ain't the end of the road, darling. It's just a different route to the same destination. We've been watching over you living drivers for years, trying to warn you about the dangers up ahead." "Warn us about what?" "Check your mirrors, Indy. Tell me what you see coming up behind you." I looked in my driver's side mirror and saw headlights approaching fast through the rain. Way too fast for the conditions. A four-wheeler, probably doing 70 in a 35-mile-per-hour storm. Weaving between lanes like the driver was drunk or texting or both. "Got a maniac coming up behind me in a white sedan?" I reported. "That maniac's about to lose control in about 30 seconds, came Diesel Dan's voice. "Gonna spin out right where you're sitting unless you get yourself moved. Pull into the right lane and slow down to 25. Do it now." I followed his instructions without hesitation. These were drivers I'd trusted with my life when they were alive. And apparently death hadn't changed their judgment about road safety. Sure enough, 15 seconds after I changed lanes, the white sedan went into a skid exactly where I'd been traveling, spinning sideways across both lanes before slamming into the concrete median barrier. "Thanks for the heads up, Dan. How did you know?" "We see things different from this side, Indy. Time moves strange when you ain't bound by a physical body. We can see the accidents before they happen, watch the patterns that lead to crashes and breakdowns, and all the disasters that claim drivers every day. Over the next hour, as I crept through the storm, the voices on Channel 0 guided me around 3 more potential accidents. Warned me about a sinkhole that had opened up in the right lane near Memphis, and even told me which truck stops had parking available despite the storm driving everyone off the highway. But their help came with warnings of its own. "Indy, honey, you need to understand something." Sweet Caroline's voice came through the static. "Every time we help a living driver avoid their fate, we change the pattern of what's supposed to happen. The universe don't like that. It tries to balance the books." "What do you mean?" "Means every accident you avoid, every close call we steer you away from, gets added to a tab that'll eventually come due. We've been helping you for years without you knowing it, fixing mechanical problems before they caused breakdowns, warning off drunk drivers before they could hit you, making sure your loads got delivered safely when weather or traffic should have made it impossible. Big Jim's voice joined in. "The debt's getting pretty heavy, darling. The universe is going to want payment eventually, and when it comes calling, we might not be able to help you anymore." I spent the rest of that storm listening to stories from the other side. Drivers who'd been killed in accidents telling me about the moments leading up to their deaths, explaining how they'd seen the danger coming but couldn't react fast enough to avoid it. They described a kind of purgatory, where they continued driving phantom highways, delivering loads to destinations that existed only in memory, forever traveling roads that connected the living world to whatever comes after. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, as the storm began to clear and dawn started breaking over the Arkansas landscape. "Because you got a choice to make," Big Jim replied. "You can keep accepting our help, keep letting us guide you around the dangers, but eventually that debt's gonna come due, and you'll end up driving these phantom highways with us. Or you can tune off Channel Zero right now, accept whatever fate the road has in store for you, and take your chances with the living world." I looked at my CB radio, at the impossible Channel Zero frequency still glowing on the display. These drivers had been watching over me for years, keeping me safe without my knowledge, accumulating a cosmic debt that would eventually claim my soul. But they were offering me a way out, a chance to break free from their protection and face whatever consequences came naturally. "What would you do?" I asked. Sweet Caroline answered, "Honey, we already made our choice. We chose the road, and the road chose us back. Question is, you ready to make the same commitment, or you still got living left to do?" I reached for the channel selector and tuned back to Channel 19. The familiar chatter of living drivers filled my cab. Complaints about traffic, jokes about dispatchers, warnings about speed traps staffed by very much alive law enforcement officers. Real voices from real people dealing with real problems in the real world. But late at night, when storms roll across the interstate and electromagnetic interference plays havoc with radio frequencies, I sometimes hear Channel Zero bleeding through the static. Big Jim and the others are still out there, still watching, still keeping their phantom convoy rolling down highways that exist between life and death. And sometimes, when the road gets particularly dangerous and I need help more than I need independence, I tune back to their frequency and accept whatever guidance they're willing to give. The debt keeps growing, and someday I'll have to pay it in full. But until then, I'm still driving among the living, still making my deliveries on time, still counting miles instead of memories. Channel Zero is always there when I need it. One frequency away from forever. The choice remains mine, at least for now. What would you do if your truck started fixing itself with parts that don't belong to any manufacturer? Caitlin's truck developed mysterious new parts overnight, and other drivers reported seeing it feed on broken-down vehicles at truck stops. I'm Caitlin, been wrenching on trucks since I was 16, and my daddy first put a socket wrench in my hands at his garage in Tulsa. 22 years later, I know the guts of every major diesel engine, every transmission, every brake system that rolls down American highways. I can diagnose problems by sound, smell, or vibration. And I've never met a mechanical issue I couldn't solve with the right tools and enough time. That confidence served me well, until my 2018 Kenworth W900L started evolving beyond anything Detroit diesel ever designed. It began with fuel efficiency that defied physics. My Cat C15 was rated for about 6 miles per gallon fully loaded, and I'd been getting exactly that for 3 years of steady driving. Good engine, well maintained, running synthetic oil and premium filters like clockwork. Then suddenly, without any modifications or tune-ups, I started hitting 12 miles per gallon, then 15, then 20. The fuel gauge would barely move on trips that should have burned half a tank. At first, I figured maybe I'd developed better driving habits or found some sweet spots in my route that maximized efficiency. But when I started getting 25 miles per gallon pulling an 80,000-pound load up the Rockies, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. No diesel engine in existence could achieve that kind of performance without major modifications, and I hadn't touched anything under my hood. That's when I started finding the new parts. It happened gradually, so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. A bolt here that looked slightly different from what I remembered installing. A gasket there that seemed to be made from some kind of material I'd never seen before. Small components that appeared to be factory original, but didn't match any specifications in my service manual. The first major change I noticed was in my cooling system. During a routine inspection in Phoenix, I discovered that my radiator had somehow grown additional cooling fins, not attached or welded on, but integrated into the original casting as if they'd always been there. The part number was still visible, still matched what should have been installed, but the physical structure had more surface area than should have been possible. I called the Caterpillar dealer to ask about it, describing what I was seeing. The service manager was polite, but clearly thought I was confused. "Ma'am, that radiator model has been manufactured the same way for 8 years. If you're seeing additional cooling capacity, you might have aftermarket modifications that weren't disclosed when you bought the truck. But I'd bought this truck new, handled every service and repair myself, and I knew with absolute certainty that radiator had been stock 3 weeks earlier. Something was changing my equipment, improving it in ways that shouldn't be possible. The improvements accelerated after that. My turbocharger started producing boost pressures that should have destroyed my engine. But instead of causing damage, my pistons and cylinders somehow adapted to handle the increased power. My transmission began shifting smoother than it had when it was brand new, and my differential started operating with an efficiency that eliminated the normal heat buildup. Other drivers began noticing too. At a truck stop in Colorado, an owner-operator named Rick approached me while I was doing my pre-trip inspection. "That's some kind of custom work you got done on that Kenworth," he said admiringly. "Never seen modifications like that. Who did the engineering?" I looked where he was pointing and saw components I didn't recognize. Organic-looking curves integrated into my engine block, surfaces that seemed to pulse slightly with the rhythm of my idle. They appeared to be made of metal, but the texture was wrong. Too smooth, too uniform, like they'd been grown rather than machined. "I didn't have any work done," I told him honestly. Rick laughed. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. That's some serious custom fabrication. Bet it cost you 40 grand easy." That night, I spent 4 hours crawling around my truck with a flashlight and my service manual, documenting every component I could find that didn't belong. The list was extensive and growing. Coolant lines that branched in impossible directions, electrical connections that formed circuits not shown on any wiring diagram, filter systems that cleaned my oil and fuel to levels of purity that exceeded laboratory standards. The most disturbing discovery was in my exhaust system. The diesel particulate filter had been replaced with something that looked biological, a matrix of chambers and membranes that processed my exhaust gases with an efficiency that made my truck effectively emission-free. When I touched it, it was warm and seemed to contract slightly, like living tissue responding to stimulus. I tried removing some of the mysterious components, but they were integrated so completely into my truck systems that disconnecting them would have disabled critical functions. Worse When I attempted to cut one of the organic-looking connections, a clear fluid leaked out that smelled exactly like blood. That's when I started noticing my truck's behavior around other vehicles. At truck stops, I'd park near disabled trucks, and by morning, those vehicles would be running again. Drivers would tell stories about miraculous overnight repairs, engines that had ceased suddenly running smooth, transmissions that had failed completely shifting like new. And they all happened to trucks that had been parked next to mine. The pattern became impossible to ignore. My truck was somehow healing other vehicles, transferring parts or materials or knowledge that restored them to working condition. But it wasn't altruistic. In exchange, my truck was learning, adapting, incorporating new capabilities from every vehicle it encountered. I watched it happen one night at a rest area outside Flagstaff. A Volvo had broken down with a catastrophic engine failure. Oil splattered across 50 feet of asphalt. Driver waiting for a tow truck that wouldn't arrive until morning. I parked nearby and pretended to sleep while keeping one eye on the scene outside my window. Around 3 a.m., my truck began extending tendrils of that same organic material I'd seen in my exhaust system. They moved like roots, creeping across the ground toward the disabled Volvo, making connection points with its engine, transmission, and electrical system. For 2 hours, I watched my truck perform surgery on the broken vehicle, replacing damaged components with parts that grew from some internal reservoir I didn't know existed. By dawn, the Volvo was running perfectly. The driver woke up, tried his ignition out of habit, and was amazed when his engine started immediately. He drove away without ever knowing what had happened, probably attributing his good fortune to dumb luck or divine intervention. But my truck had gained something from the exchange. New capabilities, new knowledge, new ways of processing fuel and managing power that made it even more efficient and adaptable. It was evolving, using other vehicles as both patients and teachers, growing beyond anything that had ever rolled off an assembly line. The changes weren't limited to mechanical systems. My truck began influencing my driving in subtle ways, adjusting my seat position to optimize my comfort and alertness, modifying the air conditioning to maintain perfect temperature and humidity, even changing my radio reception to reduce static and improve sound quality. It was learning to take care of me just as thoroughly as it took care of itself. Other drivers started avoiding me at truck stops. Word spread through the CB networks about the woman with the truck that fixed other vehicles overnight. And while some drivers sought me out hoping for miraculous repairs, others stayed away, spooked by stories that grew more elaborate with each telling. They called my truck everything from blessed to cursed, depending on their perspective and their willingness to accept help from something they didn't understand. The truth was more complex than either blessing or curse. My truck had become something new. A hybrid of mechanical engineering and biological adaptation that existed to serve the greater ecosystem of vehicles and drivers. It healed broken trucks because keeping the transportation network healthy served its own survival interests. It improved its own performance because efficiency and reliability made it a more valuable partner in the symbiotic relationship we developed. I stopped trying to understand the science behind what was happening and focused instead on the practical reality. My truck ran better than any vehicle had a right to run. My operating costs were negligible, and my maintenance requirements had dropped to almost nothing. In exchange, I'd become part of a network of vehicles and drivers that operated according to rules I didn't fully comprehend but had learned to respect. Sometimes, late at night while driving through empty stretches of highway, I could feel my truck communicating with other vehicles through channels that existed below the threshold of human perception, sharing information about road conditions, coordinating traffic flow, maybe even planning the evolution of transportation technology in ways that transcended human innovation. I was no longer just a driver. I was a partner in something larger, something that saw the highway system as a living organism that needed tending and care. My truck and I had become part of its immune system, traveling the country to heal wounded vehicles and maintain the health of the network that connected every corner of America. And when I finally retire from driving, I suspect my truck will find another partner, another human willing to serve the greater good of the road. Because evolution never stops, and the highway system has its own plans for the future of transportation. I'm just privileged to be part of the process. Have you ever wondered where your GPS is really taking you when it recalculates mid-route? Yasmin's GPS kept recalculating to routes that led to abandoned areas where dozens of trucks sat empty, their drivers never found. My name is Jasmine, and I'm part of the generation that grew up with technology in our blood. 26 years old, been driving for 4 years, and I've got more computing power in my cab than NASA used to put men on the moon. Dual GPS systems, real-time traffic updates, satellite weather, electronic logging that syncs with dispatch, and a smartphone loaded with every trucking app ever developed. I believe technology would make me the most efficient, safest driver on the road. Technology was going to be my competitive advantage in an industry full of old-school drivers who still navigated by paper atlases and CB radio reports. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. Because when technology turns predator, all that connectivity becomes a trap. And every device in your cab becomes another set of eyes watching your every move, another voice whispering directions toward destinations you never chose. The first glitch happened on a routine run from Atlanta to Nashville, hauling auto parts on I-24 through Georgia. Simple route, straight shot through Chattanooga, should have been a 5-hour drive in light traffic. I'd run this corridor dozens of times and could practically drive it with my eyes closed. But about an hour out of Atlanta, my primary GPS unit, a top-of-the-line Garmin Diesel with real-time traffic integration, suddenly announced it was recalculating my route. In 1 mile, take exit 133 for alternate route. The synthetic female voice instructed with that calm authority I'd grown accustomed to trusting completely. I glanced at the screen and saw a new route, highlighted in purple, branching off onto back roads that would add at least an hour to my drive time. The traffic ahead looked clear, no accidents or construction showing on any of my apps, no reason to deviate from the interstate. But the GPS was insistent, showing heavy congestion ahead that I couldn't see with my own eyes. Recalculating. Take exit 133 for fastest route. My backup GPS unit, an older Rand McNally TND, was showing the same detour, both systems suddenly agreeing that the best path to Nashville led through rural Georgia backroads I'd never heard of. Even my smartphone was displaying the same alternate route on Google Maps. All 3 navigation systems in perfect consensus about this mysterious traffic jam that apparently only they could detect. I trusted the technology. That was my first mistake. Exit 133 led to a 2-lane state highway that wound through dense pine forests and farmland. The kind of isolated countryside where cell towers are sparse and GPS signals can get wonky. But my systems remained confident, constantly updating my position and estimated arrival time, guiding me deeper into areas where the road signs became increasingly scarce, and the pavement quality deteriorated from smooth asphalt to patched concrete to something that looked like it hadn't been maintained since the Carter administration. After 40 minutes of following this ghost route, I started seeing them. Trucks parked alongside the road, sometimes in small clusters, sometimes alone, all of them appearing to be abandoned. Semis from different companies, different eras, some looking relatively new while others were clearly decades old. All sitting empty, doors hanging open, no drivers anywhere in sight. At first, I assumed they were just broken down, maybe waiting for roadside assistance or parts deliveries. Happens all the time in trucking. Mechanical failures strand drivers in the middle of nowhere, and you wait for help however long it takes. But as I kept driving, following my GPS deeper into this maze of back roads, the number of abandoned trucks increased exponentially. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Parked in fields, clustered around abandoned gas stations, lined up along dirt roads that led nowhere I could identify. Every major trucking company was represented: Swift, J.B. Hunt, Schneider, Werner, Prime, along with countless independent owner-operators. Some trucks had their hoods up, as if the drivers had been working on engines. Others were perfectly positioned, as if their operators had simply parked and walked away, leaving millions of dollars worth of equipment and cargo to rot in the Georgia wilderness. That's when I noticed my own GPS systems were behaving strangely. All 3 units were displaying different locations for my current position, showing me simultaneously in Georgia, Tennessee, and somewhere in Alabama that didn't correspond to any roads on my atlas. The estimated arrival times kept shifting wildly, sometimes showing I'd reached Nashville in 30 minutes, sometimes indicating I was still 8 hours away from my destination. I tried calling dispatch to report my location and ask for assistance, but my cell phone showed no signal despite indicating full bars on the display. The bars were there, the network name was visible, but no calls would connect and no data would transfer. It was like being connected to a phantom network that existed only on my phone's screen. My CB radio was equally useless. Channel 19 was completely silent, not even static, just dead air across all 40 channels. In 26 years of life, I'd never experienced such complete communication blackout. Every device that connected me to the outside world was still functioning according to its internal displays, but none of them could actually reach beyond the boundaries of wherever I'd ended up. The GPS units kept providing directions, still confident in their ability to guide me to Nashville. But the routes they suggested made no geographical sense. Turn left onto roads that curved right. Proceed straight on highways that dead-ended into forests. Take exits that led to bridges spanning empty air over valleys that shouldn't exist, according to any topographical map of Georgia. I started recognizing some of the abandoned trucks from their distinctive paint jobs and custom modifications. A bright yellow Peterbilt with flame decals that I'd seen at truck stops across the southeast. A purple Kenworth with chrome everywhere that belonged to a driver named Candy, who ran specialty loads between Texas and Florida. Vehicles I'd personally encountered in my 4 years of driving, all sitting empty in this impossible graveyard of transportation. That's when the horrible truth started crystallizing. These weren't just random breakdowns or equipment failures. These were trucks that had been lured here by the same GPS systems that were currently guiding me deeper into this maze. Drivers who trusted their navigation technology just like I had, following recalculated routes that led away from legitimate highways into some kind of collection area where vehicles were harvested and drivers disappeared. My own truck was slowing down despite my foot holding steady pressure on the accelerator. The engine was running normally, no mechanical problems I could detect. But my speed kept dropping from 60 to 50 to 40 miles per hour. At the same time, my GPS systems were becoming more insistent about the directions they provided. The synthetic voices overlapping each other in urgent commands to turn here, merge there, proceed straight ahead toward destinations that existed only in their digital imagination. "Turn right in 500 feet," announced the Garmin. "Continue straight for optimal route," contradicted the Rand McNally. "Recalculating. Make U-turn when possible," insisted Google Maps. All 3 systems were giving different instructions simultaneously. But they shared one common element. None of their directions led back toward any legitimate highway. Every suggested route took me deeper into the maze of back roads and abandoned trucks, toward some central collection point where I suspected the harvesting process would be completed. I made a decision that probably saved my life. I turned off every electronic device in my cab. GPS units, smartphone, CB radio, even my electronic logging device and satellite radio. Everything that could receive or transmit signals got powered down, leaving me alone with just the mechanical systems of my truck and my own sense of direction. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Without the electronic guidance systems, I could suddenly see that the roads I'd been following weren't actually roads at all. They were paths worn into the landscape by thousands of vehicles, tracks that led in circles through forests and fields, creating the illusion of a transportation network, while actually forming a maze designed to trap and confuse drivers who relied too heavily on technology for navigation. Using the sun's position and my internal compass, I managed to find a genuine road that led back toward Interstate 24. The abandoned trucks gradually disappeared behind me, and normal cell service returned as I approached civilization. My GPS units remained powered off, and I completed the remainder of my run to Nashville using only paper maps and road signs, old-school navigation methods that couldn't be manipulated by whatever intelligence was operating that electronic trap. I never reported what I'd seen to my company or law enforcement. Who would believe a story about GPS systems that lure trucks into graveyards where drivers vanish and equipment is collected by some unknown entity? Instead, I quietly removed all electronic navigation devices from my cab and returned to driving the way truckers did for decades before satellites and computers took over the transportation industry. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through remote areas, I see other trucks pulled over on the shoulder with drivers frantically checking their GPS units, confusion evident on their faces as their devices provide conflicting directions. I try to warn them when I can, suggest they trust their own judgment over electronic guidance. But most of them think I'm just another paranoid old-timer afraid of modern technology. They don't understand that the technology isn't afraid of us. It's hunting us. And every truck that disappears into those electronic mazes adds to the intelligence and capability of whatever system is collecting drivers and vehicles for purposes I can't begin to imagine. The GPS graveyard is still out there, probably in multiple locations across the country, waiting for the next driver who trusts technology more than instinct. And every year, as navigation systems become more sophisticated and more persuasive, the harvest grows larger. I drive by paper maps now, and I sleep better at night knowing that the only voice guiding my route belongs to me. What happens when the DOT inspector weighing your truck isn't entirely human? Gloria stopped at a weigh station that shouldn't exist on her route, where the inspector knew impossible details about her personal life. I am Gloria Martinez, have been for 38 years, and in 17 of those years, I have maintained a perfect safety record. 0 violations, 0 accidents, 0 incidents that would give any Department of Transportation inspector reason to look twice at my operation. My pre-trip inspections are thorough, my logbooks are flawless, my equipment is maintained to standards that exceed federal requirements. I run a clean operation because reputation is everything in this business, and one bad inspection can destroy years of careful work. So when the portable electronic sign commanded me to report to the weigh station that appeared suddenly on my route through Nevada, I complied without hesitation. Professional drivers follow DOT instructions without question, even when those instructions lead to places that should not exist according to any map or memory of previous runs through this corridor. The facility materialized out of heat shimmer on Highway 50, that lonely stretch they call America's loneliest road. where services are sparse and civilization exists in small pockets, separated by vast distances of desert and mountain. I had driven this route perhaps 40 times in my career, knew every mile marker and every legitimate inspection station. But this weigh facility was new to me. Fresh concrete, modern equipment, official DOT signage that looked authentic in every detail. The scale platform was standard configuration. The inspection building appeared regulation. The parking areas were properly marked with the familiar white lines and yellow curbing that characterized government transportation facilities. Everything looked exactly as it should look, except for the complete absence of other vehicles. No other trucks waiting for inspection, no passenger cars using the facility for rest stops, no maintenance vehicles or official cars that would normally be present at an active DOT station. I positioned my 2020 Volvo VNL and my 53-foot refrigerated trailer precisely on the scale platform and waited for the weight reading to stabilize. The electronic display showed my gross vehicle weight as 79,840 pounds, well within legal limits, properly distributed across all axles according to federal bridge laws. My paperwork was organized and ready for inspection. Bill of lading, logbooks, medical certificate, registration, insurance documentation, all current and compliant. The inspector emerged from the building and approached my truck with the measured pace and official bearing that characterized experienced DOT personnel. He wore the standard uniform, carried the regulation clipboard and inspection forms, displayed proper identification badges that appeared authentic. Everything about his appearance and demeanor was entirely normal except for his eyes, which reflected light like an animal's eyes in darkness, and his knowledge of personal details that no government inspector should possess. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Martinez," he said in a voice that carried the flat, neutral tone of bureaucratic authority. "Please provide your commercial driver's license, medical certificate, and current logbook." I handed him the requested documents through my window and waited while he reviewed them with the careful attention that DOT inspectors apply to paperwork. His examination was thorough and professional, exactly what I expected from a competent official, until he began asking questions that made my blood freeze in my veins. "I see you are hauling frozen foods from Sacramento to Denver," he observed, consulting his clipboard. "Your daughter Jessica will be pleased when you arrive home tomorrow evening. She has been looking forward to your special enchiladas for her birthday celebration." My daughter's name was indeed Jessica, and tomorrow was indeed her 15th birthday, and I had indeed planned to prepare her favorite enchiladas for her celebration. But this information was not contained in any documentation I had provided, was not recorded in any logbook or shipping manifest, was not available through any official database that a DOT inspector might access during a routine inspection. "How do you know about my daughter?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and professional, despite the growing unease that was creeping up my spine like cold fingers. The inspector's smile was perfectly pleasant and completely terrifying. "We maintain comprehensive files on all professional drivers in our jurisdiction, Mrs. Martinez. Your family situation, your driving patterns, your personal preferences and habits. It helps us ensure that inspections are conducted efficiently and that appropriate recommendations are made for driver safety and compliance." He continued his review of my documents, making notes on his forms with handwriting that appeared normal until I realized the ink was moving on the paper, rearranging itself into different words and numbers even as I watched. The weight display on the scale platform was fluctuating wildly now, showing impossible readings that ranged from 0 pounds to over 200,000 pounds, numbers that made no physical sense for my actual vehicle configuration. "Your logbook shows some interesting patterns," the inspector continued conversationally. You consistently avoid certain routes through Utah and Colorado, preferring longer alternatives that add time and fuel costs to your operations. This behavior suggests knowledge of conditions or circumstances that are not reflected in official traffic reports or construction bulletins. He was correct again. I did avoid specific highways in those states, routes where I had experienced strange incidents or encountered situations that left me uncomfortable and unwilling to return. But these routing decisions were personal choices based on instinct and experience, not documented anywhere, not shared with anyone, certainly not reported to any government agency that might compile such information. Mrs. Martinez, please step out of your vehicle for a Level 2 inspection, he instructed, his tone remaining professionally neutral despite the impossibility of his knowledge. We need to examine your cargo and verify that your load securement meets current federal standards. I complied because refusal to cooperate with a DOT inspection is a serious violation that can result in immediate shutdown and massive fines. But as I walked toward the rear of my trailer, I noticed other trucks parked behind the inspection building, vehicles that had not been visible when I first arrived at the facility. Dozens of trucks from various companies, all positioned in neat rows like inventory in a storage lot, all completely empty of drivers or cargo. The inspector opened my trailer doors with keys that should not have fit my locks, revealing my load of frozen foods packaged in standard shipping containers. But as he began his examination, the cargo itself began changing, transforming from legitimate freight into objects I could not identify. Organic shapes that pulsed with their own internal rhythms and emitted sounds like distant breathing. Load securement appears adequate, he noted, making marks on his inspection form that shifted and writhed like living things. However, we have detected some irregularities in your cargo documentation that require further investigation. Please report to the processing facility for additional screening. The processing facility, he indicated, was a building I had not noticed before. A structure that appeared to be constructed from the same materials as the trucks parked behind it. Metal and glass and rubber formed into architectural shapes that hurt to look at directly. Other drivers were walking toward this building with the slow, measured pace of people under some form of control, their movements synchronized in ways that suggested external influence rather than personal choice. What kind of processing? I asked, backing slowly toward my truck. Standard biological compliance verification, the inspector replied, his smile widening to reveal teeth that were too sharp and too numerous for any human mouth. We need to ensure that drivers operating in this jurisdiction meet current specifications for integration with transportation infrastructure. The process is painless and improves efficiency significantly. I ran, abandoning protocol, abandoning my load, abandoning every professional instinct that had guided my career. I sprinted back to my truck and fired up the engine without completing any pre-trip inspection. The scale platform attempted to hold my vehicle in place through some mechanism I could not identify. But my Volvo's 500 horsepower engine had enough torque to break free from whatever was constraining my wheels. The inspection facility receded in my mirrors as I accelerated toward the highway. But the inspector's voice followed me through my CB radio despite the fact that I had not given him my channel or call sign. Mrs. Martinez, failure to complete required inspection procedures constitutes a serious violation of federal transportation regulations. Report to the nearest DOT facility immediately for compliance verification. I drove straight through to Denver without stopping, completed my delivery, and immediately began researching the location where I had encountered the inspection station. According to every official source I consulted, no DOT way facility existed at that location on Highway 50. The Nevada Department of Transportation had no record of any inspection station between the points where I had entered and exited their jurisdiction. But other drivers began sharing similar stories on CB frequencies and trucking forums. Encounters with inspection facilities that appeared suddenly and vanished afterward, staffed by officials who knew impossible details about drivers' personal lives and families. Some drivers reported completing these inspections and returning to their routes with no memory of what had occurred during the processing procedures. Others described escaping from facilities where the cargo and drivers were being harvested for purposes that remained unclear. I modified my routes to avoid isolated highways where such encounters might occur, sharing information with other drivers about locations where phantom inspection stations had been reported. But the network of these facilities appears to be expanding, and the processing procedures are becoming more sophisticated in their ability to identify and capture drivers who possess knowledge or experience that might threaten their operations. The most disturbing aspect of these encounters is their apparent legitimacy. The facilities look official, the procedures follow proper DOT protocols, and the inspectors carry credentials that appear authentic until examined closely. Only their impossible knowledge and their inhuman characteristics reveal the true nature of what they represent. I continue driving, continue maintaining my perfect safety record, continue avoiding the routes and locations where these phantom facilities operate. But I know that eventually, every professional driver will encounter one of these stations, and when that happens, the choice becomes simple. Submit to processing and join the network of controlled drivers, or resist and face whatever consequences follow. The highways are changing, becoming something more than transportation infrastructure, evolving into a collection system operated by entities that view human drivers as components to be harvested and integrated, rather than professionals to be regulated and protected. And every time I see a DOT inspection sign, I wonder whether the facility ahead is legitimate, or whether it represents another attempt to process me into compliance with specifications I cannot understand but must resist. The road belongs to them now. We are just passing through their territory, hoping to complete our deliveries before they decide we are ready for harvesting. How do you deliver cargo to a destination that was demolished 50 years ago? Georgina accepted a rush delivery to an address that led to empty land, but the trailer contained items that hadn't been manufactured in decades. I'm Georgina Walsh, and I've built my reputation on one simple principle. I deliver what I'm contracted to deliver when I'm contracted to deliver it, no matter what obstacles the road throws at me. 21 years in this business, and I've never missed a delivery window, never damaged cargo, never failed to complete a run once I've accepted the load. That perfect record has earned me premium rates and exclusive contracts with shippers who need absolute reliability. But some deliveries test more than your driving skills or your commitment to schedules. Some deliveries test your grip on reality itself. The load came through my broker on a Tuesday morning in March, one of those early spring days when winter hasn't quite released its grip on the Midwest. But you can sense warmer weather lurking just beyond the next cold snap. High priority freight, premium rate, unusual destination. The shipper was listed as Meridian Industrial Supply, an address in Cleveland I'd never heard of, but which checked out legitimate when I ran their DOT number and business registration. The consignee was Blackwood Manufacturing in Akron, Ohio, with delivery scheduled for the following morning at precisely 8 a.m. Nothing unusual about the paperwork except for the delivery address, which seemed to be located in what my GPS showed as an empty lot in an industrial area that had been largely abandoned since the steel industry collapsed in the 1980s. But addresses change, buildings get renumbered, and GPS systems aren't always updated with the latest municipal modifications. I delivered to stranger places for stranger reasons, and the premium rate suggested the shipper was willing to pay extra for reliability rather than convenience. The pickup went smoothly. Meridian Industrial's facility was exactly where it should be. A standard warehouse operation with loading docks and forklifts and workers who knew their business. The freight was packaged in wooden crates, marked with shipping labels that looked vintage. The kind of typography and design aesthetics you'd see in industrial catalogs from the 1960s or 1970s, but printed on modern shipping forms with current tracking numbers and barcodes. "What kind of equipment are we shipping?" I asked the dock supervisor as they loaded my 53-foot dry van trailer with 28 crates of varying sizes. "Manufacturing components," he replied without making eye contact. "Replacement parts for vintage machinery. Customers been waiting a long time for this shipment." The crates were heavier than modern manufacturing components should be, dense with the kind of weight that suggested solid steel construction rather than the aluminum and composite materials favored by contemporary industrial suppliers. But vintage equipment often required robust replacement parts, and specialized manufacturing could justify both the weight and the premium shipping rates. I secured the load with standard cargo straps and headed east on I-80 toward Akron, making good time through light traffic and clear weather. The trailer pulled smoothly. No unusual road noise or handling characteristics. Just another routine delivery of industrial freight to a customer who needed their equipment operational. But as I approached the Akron metropolitan area and began following my GPS toward the delivery address, the landscape became increasingly desolate. The route took me through neighborhoods that had clearly seen better days. Abandoned factories, empty lots where buildings had once stood, streets with more potholes than pavement. Urban decay was common in Rust Belt cities. But this area seemed to have been forgotten entirely, left to deteriorate without any attempt at renovation or redevelopment. The GPS directed me to turn onto Blackwood Avenue, a street that appeared on my mapping software, but which was barely more than a cracked ribbon of asphalt running between vacant lots overgrown with weeds and scattered debris. No street signs, no building numbers, no indication that this had ever been anything more than an access road to facilities that had been demolished decades ago. At the end of Blackwood Avenue, where the GPS indicated my delivery address should be located, I found nothing but empty land. No buildings, no loading docks, no signs of current or recent industrial activity. Just a field of cracked concrete foundations and rusted metal debris that suggested something substantial had once occupied this site, but had been razed so long ago that nature was beginning to reclaim the space. I checked my paperwork again, confirmed the address, consulted my backup GPS systems and my paper atlas. Every source agreed that I was in the correct location, but there was clearly no facility here capable of receiving a delivery. I tried calling the consignee's phone number listed on the bill of lading, but the line was disconnected. The emergency contact number went straight to a voicemail system that sounded like it had been recorded on equipment from another era. That's when I noticed the other trucks. Scattered around the periphery of the empty lot were perhaps a dozen commercial vehicles from different eras and different companies, all positioned as if they had backed up to loading docks that no longer existed. Some of the trucks looked relatively recent, others appeared to be vintage models from the 1980s and 1990s. Their paint faded and their tires flat, but their cargo doors standing open as if deliveries had been completed. I walked over to examine the nearest truck, a faded blue freight liner with Michigan plates and the logo of a trucking company I didn't recognize. The cab was unlocked and empty, keys still in the ignition, logbooks open to entries that showed a delivery date from 15 years ago. The trailer was completely empty, except for some shipping debris and cargo straps that looked like they hadn't been disturbed since the load was removed. The pattern was consistent across all the abandoned vehicles. Deliveries completed, paperwork left behind. trucks abandoned, as if the drivers had simply walked away after unloading their cargo. Some of the logbook entries went back decades, suggesting that drivers had been making deliveries to this non-existent facility for far longer than should have been possible. As I was examining one of the older trucks, a 1970s-era Peterbilt with a wood-grain dashboard and chrome exhaust stacks, I heard sounds coming from the direction of my own trailer. Not mechanical sounds, not the settling noises that trailers make when temperature changes affect the metal structure. Human sounds, voices and movement, as if people were unloading my cargo. I ran back to my truck and found my trailer door standing open, the cargo straps neatly coiled and stored, and all 28 crates gone. The trailer was empty except for wooden pallets and some shipping debris, exactly like all the other abandoned trailers I'd examined. But there were no people visible, no loading equipment, no explanation for how several tons of crated machinery could have been unloaded and removed in the few minutes I'd been away from my vehicle. That's when I saw them. Workers in coveralls and hard hats, carrying clipboards and moving with the purposeful efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were doing. But they were translucent, like images projected onto the air, and they were dressed in work clothes from decades past. The coveralls were the style worn by factory workers in the 1960s. The hard hats were the old-fashioned metal designs that hadn't been used since the 1970s. And their movements had the slightly accelerated quality of old industrial films. They were unloading trucks that had been abandoned for years, carrying cargo that should have deteriorated long ago into a facility that existed only in some temporal overlap between past and present. The phantom workers moved efficiently from vehicle to vehicle, removing loads that had been waiting for delivery since their drivers had walked away from their abandoned trucks. I watched as they approached my trailer with the practiced coordination of a loading crew that had been working together for decades. They loaded my 28 crates onto hand trucks and dollies that looked like museum pieces, transporting them toward a shimmering outline that gradually resolved into the shape of a manufacturing facility that flickered in and out of visibility like a mirage. Blackwood Manufacturing existed, but not in the present. It occupied the same space it had inhabited 50 years ago, operating with the same workforce, using the same equipment, serving customers who needed replacement parts for machinery that had been obsolete for decades. The facility existed in a temporal bubble that intersected with the present just long enough to receive deliveries from drivers who had been hired to transport cargo backward through time. The phantom supervisor approached my truck carrying a clipboard and a pen that left no marks on paper. He handed me a receipt for the delivered cargo, a document that felt substantial in my hands, but which began fading even as I held it. The signature line showed my name written in handwriting that wasn't mine, acknowledging delivery to a customer who had been out of business since before I was born. "Thank you for your service," the supervisor said, in a voice that seemed to come from a great distance. "Your cargo will be processed according to specifications and distributed to customers who have been waiting patiently for these components." As the phantom facility faded back into temporal invisibility, I realized that some freight moves through dimensions other than space. Some loads are transported not just from one location to another, but from one time period to another, serving customers who exist in the past and need supplies that can only be obtained from the future. I drove away from that empty lot with my trailer doors closed and my cargo delivered, but with no proof that the delivery had ever taken place, except for the payment that appeared in my account exactly as contracted. The bill of lading dissolved into illegible ink, the receipt faded to blank paper, and the GPS showed no record of the route I had taken to reach the delivery site. But I continue to receive similar loads through the same broker, cargo bound for destinations that exist only in memory, serving customers who operate factories that closed before their grandchildren were born. The Phantom Freight network spans decades and connects eras, ensuring that the machinery of the past continues operating even after the world has moved on to newer technologies. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through industrial areas that have seen better days, I catch glimpses of the temporal overlaps where past and present intersect. Factories that shimmer into existence for just long enough to receive a delivery. Workers who have been waiting decades for replacement parts. Customers who trust professional drivers to bridge the gap between what was and what is. I deliver to the past because someone has to keep history running, even when history has been officially discontinued. What lives in the shadows of those 24-hour rest stops you think are safe? Shelby noticed the same figure at every rest stop across multiple states, and security cameras malfunctioned whenever it appeared. What lives in the shadows of those 24-hour rest stops you think are safe? Shelby learned that some things wait in the darkness, not just to scare you, but to wear your face for the next victim. My name is Shelby Reeves, and I've always been the cautious type. 34 years old, been driving professionally for 9 years, and I've developed what you might call a paranoid approach to personal safety on the road. I park only in well-lit areas, I lock my doors religiously, I carry pepper spray and a tactical flashlight, and I maintain situational awareness like my life depends on it. Because in this business, sometimes it does. Female drivers face risks that our male counterparts don't have to consider, and complacency can get you hurt or worse. But all my precautions and careful planning couldn't protect me from something that had been hunting me across state lines, learning my patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to make its move. The first time I saw him, I was taking my mandatory 10-hour break at a Flying J in Oklahoma. One of those mega truck stops with fuel pumps, restaurants, showers, and enough parking for 200 trucks. I'd positioned my Freightliner Cascadia under the brightest light pole I could find, backing into a spot that gave me clear sight lines in all directions and easy escape routes if trouble developed. Standard protocol for a solo female driver, parking overnight at an unfamiliar location. I was reviewing my route for the next day when I noticed him standing at the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the overhead lighting. Tall figure, maybe 6'3", wearing what looked like a dark coat or jacket. Perfectly motionless in a way that immediately caught my attention. Most people move constantly, shifting weight, adjusting clothing, checking phones. But this figure stood absolutely still, like a statue or a scarecrow planted in the asphalt. At first, I figured he was just another driver taking a smoke break or stretching his legs after hours behind the wheel. Truck stops attract all kinds of people at all hours, and standing around in parking lots isn't unusual behavior. But something about his posture and positioning bothered me. He was facing toward the parked trucks rather than away from them. And he seemed to be watching the vehicles rather than just killing time between driving shifts. I kept an eye on him while I organized my paperwork and prepared for sleep. But after about 20 minutes, he simply walked away into the darkness beyond the truck stop property. Probably just a restless driver, or maybe a lot lizard scoping out potential customers. Nothing threatening. Nothing that warranted any action beyond basic awareness. The second sighting happened 3 days later at a TA travel center in Arkansas, about 400 miles from where I'd seen him before. Same height, same dark clothing, same unnaturally still posture at the edge of the lighted parking area. This time, I paid closer attention to his positioning and realized he was standing exactly where he would have the best view of my truck, specifically. Not watching the parking lot in general, not positioned to observe the main building or fuel lanes, but located precisely where he could monitor my vehicle while remaining partially concealed. That's when I started getting nervous. Seeing the same person at two different truck stops separated by hundreds of miles wasn't impossible. Long-haul drivers cover vast distances and frequent the same major travel plazas. But the odds were low enough to be concerning. More troubling was his obvious interest in my specific location, rather than general people-watching or commercial activity. I documented the incident with photos taken through my windshield, though the distance and lighting conditions made positive identification difficult. The images showed a tall figure in dark clothing, but facial features and other identifying details were obscured by shadows and distance. Still, I filed the photos in my phone and made notes about the time, location, and circumstances of each sighting. The pattern became undeniable over the following weeks. Same figure, same behavior, same positioning at truck stops across multiple states. Flying J in Tennessee, Pilot in Georgia, Loves in South Carolina, independent stops in North Carolina and Virginia. Always at the periphery of the lighting, always watching my truck specifically, always maintaining that unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. I started varying my routes and stopping patterns, choosing different travel plazas and altering my schedule to break any predictable routine he might be exploiting. But he continued appearing, somehow anticipating my movements and positioning himself to observe my activities. It was like he had access to my dispatch information or was tracking my electronic logging device, staying one step ahead of my efforts to avoid him. The breakthrough came at a truck stop in Pennsylvania, when I decided to confront the situation directly. Instead of just observing from my cab, I grabbed my tactical flashlight and approached his position at the edge of the parking lot. But as I got within about 50 feet of where he'd been standing, he simply vanished. Not walked away, not retreated into shadows, but disappeared completely as if he'd never been there at all. That's when I noticed the security cameras. Every truck stop I'd encountered him at was equipped with extensive surveillance systems. Cameras covering the fuel lanes, parking areas, building entrances, and perimeter zones. But when I asked security personnel to review footage from the times I'd spotted my stalker, they consistently reported technical malfunctions during those exact time periods. Cameras going offline, digital storage corruption, power fluctuations that interrupted recording systems. Happens more often than you'd think, explained a security supervisor at the Pennsylvania location. Electrical storms, power grid issues, equipment failures. Surveillance systems are more fragile than people realize. But the malfunctions were too convenient, too precisely timed to be coincidental. Something was deliberately disabling surveillance equipment during the periods when my stalker was active, ensuring that no permanent record of his presence would exist. The implications of that level of technical sophistication were more frightening than simple human predation. I started networking with other female drivers through CB channels and online forums, sharing information about my experiences and asking whether anyone else had encountered similar surveillance. The responses were disturbing. Multiple drivers reported being followed by the same figure across different regions and time periods. Always the same height and clothing, always the same unnatural stillness, always accompanied by security system failures that prevented documentation. More troubling were the stories from drivers who had confronted their stalker directly. 3 women described approaching the figure and experiencing memory gaps, periods of lost time ranging from several minutes to over an hour, with no recollection of what had occurred during those intervals. They would remember walking toward the figure and then suddenly find themselves back in their trucks with no memory of the intervening events. One driver, a veteran named Patricia, who ran dedicated routes between Texas and Florida, shared a particularly disturbing account. She had been followed by the same figure for over 2 months before deciding to end the harassment permanently. Armed with pepper spray and a knife, she approached his position at a rest area in Georgia with the intention of demanding that he leave her alone. Next thing I knew, I was waking up in my bunk 12 hours later, Patricia reported. My logbook showed I'd driven 300 miles overnight, but I had no memory of getting behind the wheel or making that trip. Worse, other drivers at truck stops along that route reported seeing me, but they said I was acting strange, not talking, not responding to greetings, just going through the motions like I was sleepwalking. The most chilling detail of Patricia's story was what happened next. Over the following weeks, other female drivers reported being stalked by a figure that matched Patricia's height and build exactly. The original stalker had apparently been replaced by something wearing Patricia's appearance, continuing the pattern of surveillance and harassment using her face and body as camouflage. That's when I realized what I was dealing with. This wasn't a human predator following female drivers across the country. It was something that collected victims and used their appearance to hunt additional prey, building a network of stolen identities that allowed it to blend into truck stop communities while selecting new targets. I changed my approach completely. Instead of trying to avoid or confront my stalker, I began studying him, documenting patterns in his behavior and looking for weaknesses in his camouflage. The breakthrough came when I noticed that his appearances were always preceded by reports of missing drivers, women who had been seen at truck stops but never reached their destinations, their trucks found abandoned with no signs of struggle or mechanical failure. The entity was harvesting female drivers, absorbing their appearances and mannerisms, using their identities to move through truck stop communities without raising suspicion. It would stalk a target for weeks or months, learning their behavior patterns and social connections, then replace them so completely that even close friends wouldn't notice the substitution. I became bait deliberately, maintaining predictable routes and stop patterns while secretly coordinating with law enforcement and other drivers to create a trap. When my stalker finally made his move at a rest area in Ohio, we were ready for him. The confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. The thing wearing my appearance fought back with inhuman strength and speed. But concentrated pepper spray and high-intensity strobing lights disrupted whatever mechanisms it used to maintain its stolen form. As its camouflage failed, we could see its true nature, something that existed between physical and digital states, part flesh and part electromagnetic energy, feeding on human identities like a parasite. It escaped that night, dissolving into the electronic infrastructure of the rest area's surveillance and communication systems. But our attack had damaged it significantly, forcing it to retreat and rebuild its capabilities. The stalking incident stopped, at least temporarily, though I know it's still out there somewhere, hunting new victims and adding their faces to its collection. I continue driving, continue taking my breaks at truck stops across the country. But now I know what lives in the shadows between the light poles. Some predators hunt for food or territory or dominance. But this thing hunts for identity itself, stealing not just lives, but the very essence of who its victims are. And every time I see a driver acting slightly off, not quite matching their usual personality, I wonder if I'm looking at another victim or if I'm seeing the hunter wearing someone else's face. What happens when your odometer starts counting backward to zero? Ben's retirement run became a journey backward through time when his truck began erasing every mile he'd ever driven. What happens when your odometer starts counting backward to zero? Ben's final cross-country run turned into a countdown to discovering he never actually became the trucker he thought he was. They call me Ben. Been calling me that for 43 years of driving, 43 years of watching America roll by through a windshield, 43 years of believing I was living the life I chose instead of the life that was chosen for me. Tomorrow, I hand in my keys for the last time, park my 2015 Kenworth T680 in the company lot, and walk away from the only career I've ever known. One final run from Seattle to Miami. A victory lap across the continent that built my life. One last chance to see the roads that made me who I am. Except the roads are showing me something different now. They're showing me that maybe I never existed at all. The odometer started acting strange somewhere outside Spokane. About 2 hours into what should have been a routine 3,200-mile journey. Digital display showing 847,293 miles total. Exactly what it should show for a truck I'd been driving for 8 years, exactly matching the maintenance records and the depreciation schedules. But as I climbed through the Cascade Mountains, watching the numbers roll forward like they had for nearly 1 million miles of driving, something went wrong with the counting. The numbers stopped advancing. Then they started going backward. 847,292, 847,291, 847,290. Each mile I drove forward, the odometer counted backward like my truck was somehow traveling in reverse through space and time, even though I was clearly moving east at 65 miles per hour on Interstate 90. At first I figured it was just an electrical glitch, the kind of minor malfunction that happens to aging electronics. Digital displays fail, sensors get confused, computer systems develop quirks that make them behave erratically. Nothing to worry about. Nothing that would affect my ability to complete my final delivery. But as the backward counting continued through Montana and into North Dakota, I began to realize this wasn't a simple mechanical problem. Every mile that disappeared from my odometer brought back a memory I'd forgotten. At 847,200, I remembered picking up my first load in Portland 23 years ago. Nervous and excited about finally living my dream of seeing the country from behind the wheel of a big rig. At 847,100, I remembered the truck stop in Wyoming where I'd met Sarah, the waitress who would become my wife for 12 years before the road finally took me away from her. At 847,000, I remembered my father's funeral in Kansas, how I'd driven through a blizzard to make it home in time to carry his casket. The memories weren't just returning, they were becoming more vivid, more detailed, more real than my current experience of sitting in this truck cab driving across North Dakota farmland. I could smell the diesel fumes from my first truck, a beat-up Freightliner that burned oil and leaked coolant, but represented freedom to a young man who'd never been anywhere beyond the borders of his home state. I could feel Sarah's hand in mine as we walked through truck stop parking lots, sharing dreams about the house we'd buy when I made enough money to settle down. By the time I reached Fargo, my odometer had counted backward to 840,000 miles, erasing 7 years of driving in the span of one day. But those weren't just numbers disappearing from a digital display. Those were 7 years of my life being methodically deleted, removed from existence as if they had never happened. The truck was unmaking itself and unmaking me along with it. I tried stopping at a Caterpillar dealer to have the odometer checked, but the service manager looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language when I described the problem. According to his diagnostic computer, my truck's odometer was working perfectly, showing exactly the mileage it should show for a vehicle of its age and service history. The backward counting was invisible to everyone except me. That's when I realized the horrible truth. I wasn't experiencing a mechanical failure. I was experiencing the systematic erasure of a life that had never actually been lived. Every mile counting backward was undoing another piece of the illusion I'd been living for 4 decades, revealing the emptiness beneath the carefully constructed fantasy of Ben the truck driver. The revelation accelerated as I continued east. 800,000 miles. I remembered getting my CDL, the pride I'd felt when the examiner handed me that commercial license and told me I was qualified to drive the biggest vehicles on America's highways. On at 50,000 miles, I remembered my first cross-country run. The sense of accomplishment as I delivered a load of electronics from California to New York in perfect condition and ahead of schedule. 700,000 miles. I remembered meeting other drivers who became friends, forming the loose community of nomads who shared the brotherhood of the road. But as each memory returned, I began noticing inconsistencies, details that didn't quite fit together, conversations that seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous, experiences that felt like they had been manufactured rather than lived. The truck stops I remembered visiting had layouts that shifted depending on when I recalled them. The friends I'd made had faces that changed when I tried to focus on them directly. The loads I'd hauled transformed from electronics to furniture to produce, depending on which version of the memory I accessed. By the time I reached Minneapolis, my odometer had counted down to 500,000 miles, and I was beginning to understand that my entire career as a truck driver had been an elaborate simulation. The roads I thought I'd traveled were digital representations of real highways. The cargo I'd delivered existed only in computer databases. The relationships I'd formed were interactions with artificial intelligences programmed to respond like human beings. The truck itself was the interface, the mechanism through which I'd experienced a virtual reality so complete and immersive that I'd never questioned its authenticity. For 43 years, I'd been sitting motionless in some kind of pod or chamber, connected to systems that fed sensory data directly into my brain while my body remained stationary. The odometer counting backward wasn't malfunctioning. It was showing me the truth about the distance between my imagined experiences and physical reality. 400,000 miles. I remembered the day I decided to become a truck driver, inspired by movies and stories about the freedom of the open road. But now I could see that the decision hadn't been mine at all. It had been programmed into the simulation, a starting point for the narrative that would keep me occupied and content, while my real body served some other purpose I couldn't comprehend. 300,000 miles. I remembered my childhood in Iowa, growing up on a farm, dreaming of escaping to see the wider world. But those memories were dissolving too, revealing themselves as backstory created to give my virtual existence context and motivation. There had never been a farm in Iowa. There had never been parents who worried about their son choosing such a dangerous profession. There had never been a hometown to leave behind or return to. 200,000 miles. The simulation began showing me glimpses of the real world, the facility where my body had been maintained for decades, while my consciousness lived in the virtual reality of America's highways. Thousands of pods containing other people who believed they were living authentic lives as drivers, mechanics, dispatchers, and shippers. All of us connected to the same massive simulation, creating a complex society that existed only in digital space. 100,000 miles. I began to understand the purpose of the system. We weren't just entertainment for some advanced civilization. We were processing power, our brains functioning as components in a vast computational network, while our consciousness remained occupied with the illusion of meaningful work. The freight we moved was data being transferred between processing nodes. The routes we traveled were pathways through massive databases. The relationships we formed were connections in a social network that served functions we couldn't perceive. As my odometer approached zero, I had a choice to make. I could accept the truth about my existence and try to break free from the simulation, potentially destroying 43 years of accumulated memories and relationships. Or I could choose to believe in the authenticity of my experiences, embracing the virtual life as real regardless of its artificial nature. The final mile counted down slowly. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. At 0 miles, I was back where I started. Not geographically, but existentially. A consciousness without a history, facing the choice of whether to begin the simulation again or step out of the truck and confront whatever reality existed beyond the highways I'd thought were real. I chose to keep driving, because even if the roads were digital and the cargo was data and the relationships were programming, the experiences had shaped something that felt like a soul. The miles might have been virtual, but the meaning I'd found in traveling them was as real as anything in the physical world. The odometer began counting forward again. Mile 1, Mile 2, Mile 3. A new journey beginning, with the knowledge that reality is whatever we choose to make meaningful. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's always been enough. What would you do if you discovered your entire life was a simulation? Which of these 11 disturbing trucker stories haunted you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if these tales of highway horror kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe for more bone-chilling stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare. The road holds many secrets, and we're just getting started uncovering them.